The best piece of advice I actually received was somebody telling me, like, usually you go through a few calls and you have a sense of like what the issues are that are most concerning to investors. Rather than let them be and like hope that people don't ask about those things, you should come up with the right framework to position those things positively and then lead with those things. And in doing that, you actually are able to meaningfully strengthen your pitch and not have to worry so much about those core concerns. It sounds simple. It's a little bit harder to do in practice, but it's worth spending the time on figuring out what that narrative should be and then going into it that way, right? And an example where somebody's like really concerned about how ChatGPT can do what you do, come up with the framework around how you're building a more holistic platform with integrations to other places that pulls in the right relevant data, like whatever else. And that is obviously not something that can just be done from a chatbot.
Taher, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation. I'm super excited to record this next installment of our funded series, which, as you know, came out of the board of advisors meeting that we had about a month ago at this point. And the purpose of these conversations is to give a tactical, comprehensive look at the steps required for an early stage founder to successfully raise their seed round of funding. So we'll get into the nitty gritty in just a couple of minutes, but I would love to kick things off by having you give just a quick intro to DocDraft, what your company's mission is, and what y'all are building in pursuit of that mission.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Alex. Appreciate it. So I think the quick overview of DocDraft is that we're really trying to build the AI general counsel for small and mid-sized businesses. And we took a look at the legal landscape, and what we found is that on average, SMBs are some of the most underrepresented groups out there. In fact, 75% of SMBs typically self-represent for most of their legal needs, and we wanted to provide a better way forward for them. One that didn't require them to necessarily go to a law firm and go through the kind of time-consuming and costly process of hiring a firm, and one that got them away from the kind of brittle templates that they'd been using and working off of those and literally Googling things and trying to figure it out themselves, right? And so we thought there was a good middle ground to be built where we could support them in a much more cohesive and coherent way. And that's really what we're building here at DocDraft.
Wow. 75% of SMBs self-represent. That sounds dangerous. And that's a pretty crazy statistic.
Yeah, and self-represent has a kind of a broad set of meanings, right? It can mean anything from they are literally representing themselves in court or writing legal documents in Word and using those to, just winging it on a handshake, right? And any of those options we think kind of leave something to be desired. And that's really why we're trying to build a much more holistic experience to help them provide them with customized and bespoke legal support. So really trying to use more and more in context around their business and their goals and their objectives, and then use that to help provide a much more kind of handheld and catered experience.
Now, I know that you've had a wide range of experience at startups in the past. We originally met when we were both in Cleveland and you were working for Jumpstart. You went on to RV Share, NLP Labs, maybe there had a couple of other stops in there as well. Was there something about your previous experiences that led you to see that this problem existed, or how did you land on DocDraft as your next startup?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the thoughts on DocDraft really came from personal more than professional, which is on my mom's side, I come from a family of solo practitioners. My mom's a solo attorney and her father was, and her brother is as well. And then on my dad's side, I come from a family of small business owners. So my dad, all of his siblings, his father, all have their own small businesses. And so I really grew up seeing some of these challenges, which is the first is the frequency and uniqueness of legal needs that pop up for small businesses. And then on the attorney side, just had grown up seeing the challenges with the workflow from my mom. And so, so that's kind of what sparked the interest in building into legal tech and where we saw really the opportunity come from. And so, less to do with my professional background, which, happy to talk through, but more about personal experience.
So you had several experiences with venture-backed startups in the past. And when you were starting DocDraft, did you know kind of from the outset that you wanted to build this as a venture-backed business?
Yeah, that was always the intent. I always felt that the best way to build a large and impactful business, with technology specifically, is to be venture backed. I think in a world where we were trying to, I guess the way we always looked at our business was: are we AI first and attorney second, or are we attorney first and AI second? In a world where we were attorney first and AI second, I think you could build a really successful business without having to raise capital. But we knew we wanted to be AI first and attorney second, primarily because we knew that the only way to get the price point to a place where it was really like generalizably used by SMBs kind of across the country was to have a heavy software and AI component. So knowing that going in, we kind of expected that we had to be venture backed.
And the funding round that we are here to talk about today is the pre-seed round that you raised in June of 2023. I pulled these numbers off Crunchbase. I see you might have made a couple of quick tweaks here. So
yeah. I don't know how they get that information, but it's mostly right, or at least close.
So the pre-seed round, which you raised $1.5 million within in June of 2023, led by Harlem Capital. To start, obviously, you announced the round in June of 23, so it may have closed earlier in the year. How did you decide that early 2023 was the right time for you to raise venture capital? Or how did you know that you were ready? What was the narrative that you took to investors to prove that they should give you that money?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I'm sure you all remember like the initial wave of hype around AI. That was actually one of the things that pushed us into raising the round probably sooner, actually, because we were still very much like working through our thesis on the space, what we wanted to build, what we wanted our product experience to look like. We were working with early customers at the time, but just seeing kind of the mania, we knew that it might make sense to raise a round sooner rather than later. And so that was kind of the one of the big drivers in actually.
So obviously, yeah, ChatGPT launches in, was that September, October of 2022. There's this whole new wave of companies that are started on top of the momentum that created. Could you just talk a little bit about the story that you told to the investors that you went out to? Because there's a couple of different components. We think about the market, the team, the traction, the product itself. What were the different ingredients to the pitch that you took to raise this round?
There's always a little bit of all of that, but I think the biggest thing that was most relevant for us when we were raising our round was our approach to the space. And so already at that time, there was a lot of activity going in towards like upmarket. And that's just continued since. And so there was and still is a company called Harvey. There's another one called Co-Counsel, which actually already sold to Thomson Reuters for like $700 million. There's a company called Ivo, there's Even Up, there's Eversort. There was like a bunch of companies that were all trying to sell some version of software to either big firms or to big companies in their general counsel offices. And so the firm approach was, let's go sell to a firm and help them make their attorneys more efficient, and then they can either kind of profit off of that or be more efficient with their own clients and have a better customer experience. And the general counsel pitch was, general counsels are like any other operations unit within a company. Driving efficiency there ultimately helps bottom line and reduces headcount. And so we should build software that helps facilitate that. So those were the two kind of prevailing theses in the space. And we really came at it from kind of the small raw approach, especially from my background. And so we looked at it and we thought, like, what can AI do to help with smaller companies and consumers that have legal needs, and how can that end up working with and benefit solo attorneys, right, or smaller firms? And so that was really the orientation that we took, which was kind of inverse of the market, and that's I think what really helped resonate.
That's really interesting. Yeah, if you think about the number of businesses that a company like DocDraft has the ability to impact, it's probably much larger than the number of businesses that product going after like larger firms could touch. So I could see how that like counter positioning could be really appealing.
Totally right, and I think when we all think about law firms, we think about like Midtown Manhattan firm and expensive lawyers, and certainly there's like room to sell technology to them. So this isn't to say that those other theses aren't valid. It's really more that we looked at the market and we thought actually this is the segment that's most underserved because there wasn't going in, and there still isn't a whole lot of technology there, and ultimately like those are the consumers that are a little bit more price conscious, right? Like when Apple hires a big firm, like they don't really care what the bill looks like as long as they get the results that they want. And that's often true for the folks that are hiring bigger firms. Like there's always price tension to be sure, but they're just less price sensitive when you're talking about larger companies.
Great. So let's dive into the fundraise process and we'll just kind of go from start to finish. So at the outset of your raise, to start, how long did the full process take from beginning to end? And then starting at the top of the funnel, how many investors did you reach out to make your initial pitch and try to have those introductory meetings with?
Yeah. So just to kind of give you the full timeline. So my co-founders and I decided we wanted to kind of go all in on our direction of like AI plus legal October, November of 2022. And so there was kind of two elements to that. One was, all right, let's start building product and let's start kind of forming our thesis. And then the second part was like, let's figure out like when we want to start thinking about our fundraise. And so we probably kicked off in earnest our fundraise like maybe January or February of the following year, and then kind of went heads down on it. And so took we closed literally the last week of June. So it took us let's say like four-ish months in total.
Okay. And so you kicked off in January, February. How did you build your initial list of target investors?
Yeah, so I basically looked into firms that invested like early stage, right? So we had at the time we had like some pilot customers, but that was pretty much it. Like no revenue, and we had a product that was kind of in the market and we were playing around with, and so very early stage. So we looked for investors that were kind of focused at that segment of companies, ones that were like very, very early and just getting started. And so that obviously took out a lot of firms, right, that invest typically later. And then from there, we tried to cast as wide of a net as possible, knowing that that our approach was relatively unique to the market and like ultimately was not going to be for everyone. I think that one thing that we knew going in is a lot of firms like want to see you just sell into enterprise, and they like seeing like a big ACV and like the big logos. Obviously, we have a different approach, and so we wanted to cast a wide enough net that we made sure we found firms that would resonate with our approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We had a conversation last week with a founder named Siddharth who's building a product called Subscript. And Siddharth is a longtime Air CFO client. And he had a line that I really appreciated, which was, when you're pitching to investors, you're not trying to convert the non-believers. You're just trying to sort out the non-believers from the believers, then get the believers on board. You're not going to be able to convince someone of, there's a lot of like components that go into the narrative behind a pitch, and you need to find someone who is resonating with the full picture in order for that investor to be a viable long-term partner for you. And so for you, pitching a narrative that was running counter to what a lot of other investors were probably seeing in your space at that time, it would make sense that you probably heard a lot of no's. You've probably heard a lot of people who were like, why aren't you pursuing this like Harvey is?
Exactly, right. I mean, like that was kind of like a route we could have taken, right? Which is like, oh, Harvey sucks for these reasons, and we can build something better, and here's how we're going to do it, right? That's a reasonable enough strategy, right? And obviously, many companies have built like Harvey clones, and like are trying to compete directly with them. But yeah, we just had a different view of the market, and really, I think more than anything, we had a different customer segment that we wanted to serve, and I think that is kind of the key way that I looked at it. Is like there's enough money in big law that there will be tens or hundreds of companies chasing after their business. I want to go where there's one, less competition, which is good for business, but secondly, where there's going to be a real market need.
So how many firms would you say that you connected with initially for those first pitches?
Yeah, we probably spoke to like 50, I would say 50 to 70 firms, somewhere in that range. And so it's always a variety, right? Some of the firms are ones that would want to lead the round. Some are ones that would write like a pretty small check-in, but are just interested and curious. And so like you kind of get a gamut. And I think, one thing that especially in the earlier stages, you have to decide is like, just what do you want the round dynamics to look like, right? Do you want somebody to price it? Do you want to price it yourself? Like, do you want to have a bunch of small checks? Do you want to have, one big check? Those are all like things that you have to kind of sort through early on as you're thinking through the raise strategy.
And how did y'all decide to approach that decision around the composition of your cap table for the pre-seed?
Yeah, we wanted to have ideally a larger check come in and kind of lead the round. I think for us, the way we looked at it was like that would, one, obviously it's easier to deal with one investor than a bunch of small ones. But really, we thought that we'd get a better partnership out of having a one larger check versus a few smaller funds or smaller checks where they're taking option bets, but maybe you're a little bit less invested in the success of the company long term.
I'd love to come back to the topic of how you ended up choosing the firm that you went with, but a question on tactics. So if you reached out to 50 VCs, what are some of the approaches that you took to source intros to those VCs? Because, sending a cold email to a VC is often not a strategy for success.
Yeah, totally. And so I think there's kind of a few strategies. So the first is obviously you build out the list, then you build out all of the relevant partners. Then you can go check on LinkedIn and see like who you have a mutual connection with, and then you can go ask those mutuals. And so that's like the very tactical that I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of people. The other one is obviously if you know people directly, you just reach out to them yourself and let them know what you're doing. The third is actually we got an investor to be pretty interested in doing this, was just like meet people on Twitter, especially in the early stages. This is a little bit more effective because people will talk more holistically about like ideas they have. And then you can engage and say, hey, you had an idea, like, we're actually building the thing that you have an idea on. So that's another one. And then the last one, which is like the kind of the inverse strategy, which I think is probably the most effective, is go to the friends that are founders or operators that are founders that you know really well, either close friends or people that you've had like close personal experience with, and start there and kind of do the inverse, which is go to those people, let them know what you're planning on doing, and then ask them if there are 3 to 5 investors that they know really well and they would recommend. And the benefit of going through it in that inverse mechanism is the quality of intro is really high because you're not telling people like, hey, do you know this random person? And they might say, hey, I've met him once, but I can shoot him a note. It's instead the opposite, where you're saying, hey, you know me really well. Hopefully you think that I'll be successful. And because you like me and you think I'll be successful, can you introduce me to the people that you also know well? And so that strategy also works to get really, really high quality connections.
Yeah, I like that fourth approach a lot. And one of the through lines that I'm already seeing from the couple of conversations that we've had with founders about their fundraise process that surprised me is how much of this process is really about relationships and using your network to get your foot in the door with investors, but then ultimately like build strong relationships with those investors, because taking venture capital from a firm is a long-term commitment. I think the first 2 founders that I talked to both compared it to like a marriage. And so, yeah, I think that going through your strong ties within the startup ecosystem is a really smart approach.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of echo that sentiment, like it's a marriage in terms of like longevity, but it's also a kind of a marriage in terms of the ups and downs. Like I know we'll get to like some of the things I've learned kind of working with investors, but I think the thing that is maybe said a lot, but it's hard to actualize, is no matter how good your company is and how well it's doing, you're going to have kind of bumps in the road. And the question ultimately is, would you want to talk to this person about something that's going wrong? It's easy to talk to people when things are going right. And everyone kind of seems like they're easy to talk to in a situation where things are going right. The question is, when the rubber meets the road and things are tough, would you want to engage with this person, right? In like a kind of a high stress, difficult environment. And that's like the question you should really be asking yourself.
So going back to the first round of meetings that you took with investors, what were the materials that you put together for those meetings? And if you could just talk through kind of like what you sent ahead of time, what topics you covered within the conversations, what sort of questions you were asked, and what kind of feedback you got. Those would be some really interesting
Yeah,
things for us
I
to
usually
cover.
like I would try to avoid sending a deck until after the first conversation. So the first thing I would send is I would build out like a pretty thorough blurb talking about what we were doing. And so that should include like, very quick high level overview of what you're doing and why it's important, maybe some progress and traction and like why you've been successful thus far, and maybe something about the team and like why you're the right team to do it. And so it doesn't need to be longer than like 6 sentences, but like really tight, well-crafted 6 sentences, kind of talking through that. And the idea there is really just to build in a good hook where people want to take the meeting and want to meet you. And then from there, you obviously have the call where you're kind of walking through the business and the strategy and walking through your background and what you're doing. And then from there, you can then send the deck and try to kind of really get them in.
And what were the sorts of questions that investors tended to ask in those first meetings?
Yeah, well, we were in like the AI heyday, right? Of like ChatGPT came out, it broke everyone's brain. They didn't understand what was happening. And so the number one question we used to get, honestly, to some extent we still get, is I don't understand why ChatGPT can't just do this. So that was like the thing that we had to kind of work through at first. And then from there, right, you can get into like some of the higher order thoughts around like how to build product. And so like one of the early trends that existed in AI was nobody wanted to initially invest at the application layer because the initial assumption was actually like this universal like chatbot can do everything. And so all you really need is companies that are going to invest in the infrastructure layer to like make it easier for companies to deploy some version of ChatGPT into like their business. That thesis has, I think, mostly been proven, like, if not wrong. I think the trends have definitely shifted away from that. And that's because, like, it's actually easier for larger companies like an OpenAI to build out infrastructure. That's actually the first thing they'll do. So that's like, and then the other thing is like people have realized that, their imaginations have started to kick in a little bit more. So they're more aware of like how you could build different product experiences leveraging AI that's away from just like a chat experience.
Yeah, I think the other factor contributing to the shifting consensus is obviously open source, right? And the fact that it seems like the large research labs are, to a certain extent, hitting a ceiling when it comes to the performance gains that they can get from just scaling up the size of the training data, and these open source companies are closing the gap. So it's not like, DocDraft is going to have to sit on top of OpenAI's rails. Like there may be a point where the open source solution that you could build off of is, for all intents and purposes, like a perfect substitute for what would come out of an OpenAI. Just out of curiosity, what's the model that y'all are leveraging for DocDraft?
So we use a mix. There's certain tasks in our product that are OpenAI. A lot of it is actually Anthropic, and then we have some open source models that we deploy as well. So it's a mix, and it's intentionally designed that way, so we can always swap out models as and when we need to.
That makes a lot of sense. Shout out to Anthropic, former Air CFO client, one of our favorite ones to name drop.
Oh, really? That's pretty cool. Yeah, you guys should market that more. I had no idea.
We pitched OpenAI and we were in the final two, and we unfortunately did not land that business. But the controller of OpenAI referred Dario and Daniela to Air CFO based on our pitch when they were spinning out of OpenAI. And so we started working with them when they were 12 people with their laptops. And then a couple of months after that, they raised $600 million with 20 people in their laptops. So that was a really fun client to have a courtside seat for awesome. The early stages of the journey. Cool. So going back to the fundraise process. So you had your initial meeting, and it sounds like the big question that you needed to get aligned with the investors on was, will OpenAI be able to build DocDraft as part of a big foundational model?
Well, it's funny because any meeting that started with that didn't get very far. And so the people that were really focused on like the OpenAI piece were generally speaking not actually that interested. The ones that were really interested were the ones that were very curious about the attorney workflow, and like what goes right, what goes wrong, and then like how AI and software in general can play a role in like drafting documents, obviously, which is what we do. And so those were the ones that were like they were kind of curious about the right topics.
Yeah, talk about not trying to convince the non-believers. I can imagine.
Yeah, and when you're fundraising, you're just kind of like rapid fire going back to back with conversations. And so you can actually often tell in the first like 10 minutes, like this is not going anywhere. Like they're focused on this one thing and like there's nothing I can say that can convince them otherwise, right? And it can become very theoretical, right? It can be like, okay, well, like, one day AI will just be like all lawyers will just be AI and like AI will be arguing in the court. This is a real thing I heard. And AI will be arguing in the courtroom against other AI. So like, where do you play in that? It's like, don't know, like, don't play in that, like, don't believe that it's going to happen either. But like, and so, yeah, it's almost like you're trying to sell like a steering wheel to somebody who only believes that there will be self-driving cars. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, if that's what you believe in and that's the future that you're kind of working towards, like you shouldn't buy or invest in a steering wheel, right?
Yeah. So those investors self-selected out. So you had the initial conversation, sent the pitch deck following that meeting. How many approximately out of those, if we just say 50 initial conversations, how many of those investors did you progress forward with to your second round of meetings?
I would say like the general hit rate of people going to a second conversation is probably like 10 to 20%, something in that range. And so, and that can vary, right? That can be like second conversation for a smaller check. It could be, second conversation because they're interested in leading the round. But yeah, that's roughly what I would say is like the percentage that go through.
Okay. So you had maybe 10 conversations with investors in the second round?
Yeah, something like 10. Maybe a little bit more, but yeah, roughly 10 to 15. And then of that, I think you kind of get another maybe 20 to 30% that actually will get to the point where they want to invest. Maybe a little bit more than that on that number too, but yeah.
And how did the conversation shift from the first meeting to the second meeting?
Yeah, so first meeting is very like high level, trying to understand like what you're doing, why you're doing it, and often is a lot about like personal background on the founders. Second meeting gets into like kind of a little bit more brass tacks around like traction, strategy. Is the strategy working? Like, is there a different strategy you should be pursuing? Like, how does the product play into this? Like all that kind of stuff, right? Pricing. So it gets to be a little bit more detailed on the business. Now, obviously, like we're talking about a company that had no revenue at the time, right? And so there's only so much data you can provide on anything. But it starts to get into that. And then I know you asked about artifacts. I think the main artifacts that we presented were obviously a pitch deck, a workup of like all of our like our competitors and how we saw the market more broadly. And so that was like part Excel, part like narrative, just talking through the space. And then the third was like a very basic financial plan.
Did you use these conversations to evaluate the investors who were sitting on the other side of the table as well? And if so, what were some of the questions that you asked, or how did you think about choosing the right partner for DocDraft?
One question that I asked every investor was just like trying to get a better understanding of how they typically work with companies. And it was kind of pretty illuminating because like a lot of people will say, like there's a generic set of things that you say that are the right things, right? And everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people will just say those things. It's like, oh yeah, we're here to be a partner or whatever. Like it'll be full of generalities, right? Harlem actually has like a pretty detailed answer, which I'm happy to give now or later. But they were very specific, and that obviously impressed me. And then the third was is like this other category, I'll call it, of like people that are like, oh, like we go in and like we can understand what's going wrong, and like we can like tell the founders like based on our experience. That's the one you want to avoid, right? So that's like okay, like yeah, every business is different and unique. Obviously, you want investors that have experience and understand from their backgrounds like how to build successful companies. But the key thing that you're actually looking for, at least in my opinion, is like you want that experience to match some level of humility where they understand like, yeah, I did it in my market in these ways, but the world has changed for these reasons. Businesses have changed, right? Like in our case, AI is totally revolutionary. So nobody's seen anything like this before. So there's only so much I can grasp from my old background. And like the rest of it is going to be us trying to figure it out together. And so that's like the kind of the buckets of answers I got that I look for.
I like that word humility. I think that is a really important thing for a founder to have in a VC. It's probably pretty rare though. What was the answer that Harlem gave that made them stand out to you as a potential?
Yeah, it was very tactical. And so it was, look, if we're going to invest, we will do the following things. And like one of the things was like right out of the gate, they said like, we'll prepare pretty detailed memo internally for us to get to a decision. If we invest, we'll take that memo and we'll share it with you, and you can use our diligence in our memo and like go sell that to other people to help close out the round. Now, in our case, we actually didn't need a whole lot of help to close out the round, and we kind of knew that going in. But actually, the answer itself was the most impressive part to me. Right, was everybody else gave these like very fuzzy answers, and they gave something that was very tactical, practical, and actionable. And so it was like, it's not even like, oh, once they invest and they're on the cap table, they'll add value in theory. It's like, no, before it even closes, we'll help you get to the finish line. Here's how we can. And so that was something that impressed me. And so, yeah, so that was probably, I would say, like, of all the answers I got, actually probably one of the strongest.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I hadn't heard that as a selling point from the other the founders that I talked to about how their VCs are talking about bringing value to the table. So you decided that Harlem was your preferred partner to lead the round. From that point forward, how did you go about filling in the remainder of the 1.5 million with your follow-on investors?
Yeah, well, actually, even before that, just like to add a little color on the Harlem thing, right? Like we talked a little bit about like network and knowing people and relationships. Like the irony is, I obviously met lots of new people in this process. Brandon, who is our partner at Harlem, who led the DocDraft round, he's somebody I actually had known for years. And so I had known him from my Cleveland days and his Cleveland days, and we kept in touch. And so it was one where like actually like the relationship really helped, because there was, I think, at least on both sides, a lot of comfort that made it easier, and knowing that we'd be fine working together over the course of months or years. So that was definitely like helpful, and then has worked out well since. For the rest of the round, the other largest check was somebody I actually met during the process, and actually met on Twitter. So he his name is Yohei Nakajima. He's at this fund called Untapped Ventures, and he's become like pretty famous. At the time, he wasn't as famous, but he like is like a Twitter influencer now on all things AI. So we had met like early days, just like people that were really interested in LLMs pre ChatGPT, and had kept in touch. And then prior to the Harlem commitment, when I was talking to him, he was like, "Look, I'm in no matter what you're doing, and like, right, I think this makes sense, and like the idea makes sense, and like, just let me know, and like whatever the terms are, I'm fine with." And so I guess just we'd built that relationship, not over the course of years like Brandon, but at least over the course of months. And there was kind of a lot of comfort there. And that's, one of the reasons I wanted him on the cap table, in addition to his budding and now real Twitter fame.
Out of curiosity, when did you first connect with him on Twitter? Was it during the ChatGPT wave, or was it previous to that?
It was before that. And so, like the way he referred to it, he said like there was a lot of people I met in like the original AI wave. I was one of them. At the time, DocDraft didn't exist, so I was just like a guy that was curious about AI. And he was similarly, like he was like, now all he's known for is AI, but at the time he was just like a normal VC, right? And so he was just a VC that was curious about AI. And so that's how we initially met. And then obviously got along well and kept in touch.
I know Brandon back from my Ohio State days, actually. So I've been following along with the Harlem Capital stuff. I was a year above me at Fisher. So as you're going through this whole process, sounds like from the dozens of meetings that you were taking and all of the work that goes into managing that investor pipeline in between meetings, that's essentially close to a full-time job in and of itself. How did you manage your time between closing and selling DocDraft to investors, and then also trying to build the business simultaneously?
Just probably one of the hardest parts of fundraising is like trying to be two places at once. One of the other big challenges with it is like fundraising takes like a lot of mental preparation. It's not just like you walk in and you talk, obviously. Like you have to like prepare like what you're going to say. You have to look up the investors, have a good understanding of like what they care about and what to focus on. You have to prepare materials. Often like this, it's not even just preparing materials. You'll get a lot of like people sending you 2 to 5 questions, and then you're responding to that in email. And so you can spend hours doing that, right? Where you're trying to give the best answer you can and pull information to answer that. And so, yeah, it is really a full-time job, and it's really challenging, particularly at a small company, because there's nobody else to do anything else, right? And so it's really hard to like step away and not do the day-to-day. Like in my case, right, I was the only one working with our pilot customers, and so I had to still do that in some capacity, right? Otherwise, we'd lose any product momentum that we had. And so, yeah, so it's really just a lot of juggling and trying to fit it all into to 24 hours, which can be tough.
What were some of the tools or tactics that you use to stay organized on the fundraising side while you were trying to juggle between that and running the actual business?
Yeah, I probably should have done a better job of this, honestly. Like all I used was just Google Sheets. And so I just had like a running list of the people I was talking to, and then I would just kind of update it on like where we were in the process.
Yeah, that seems to be the default answer for folks, especially at the early stages. Harlem Capital and then the gentleman that you met on Twitter were your two largest investors. Could we talk for a minute about the closing process? Like what happened from the time that you got those two commitments to the end of June when you ultimately ended up receiving the wires and closing out the round? Just like what are all the things that folks on this call might not realize kind of go into that process?
Yeah. So, you get a term sheet, and the term sheet usually has a range. So it's like, we'll invest X amount on a Y amount round minimum and like maximum of, Z amount. And so you have to get enough capital to get to that middle spot. Now, this is where obviously Harlem talked about how they'd help. We were actually pretty close to the number anyways, just because we had all these other folks that were interested. And so we kind of moved on it relatively quickly, right? Which was like, now we have to like negotiate these terms as much as we want, sign the term sheet. Harlem is actually very easy about it. Like they're like, okay, once you sign, like we'll pick a date and just wire. And because it was a note, we didn't have to time everything on the same day. And then I took that and went back to Yohei, and then a few angels had them sign and wire as well. And so it was not as bad as it can be, I think, because we had front loaded a lot of that process. And so post receiving the term sheet and signing, I think there was like about a month before the cash hit the bank, which is, I think, actually like pretty fast relative to other people's processes.
It's one of the benefits of raising on convertible notes, right? Is it's a little bit more lightweight of a process. Did you use the standard SAFE framework for?
Yeah, we used a standard
notes?
SAFE. We did have like a side letter with some additional rights, but yeah, it was easy to work off of, easy to negotiate and sign. And so yeah, it's honestly like I read somewhere online that like one of YC's greatest contributions to the tech world is, in addition to the companies, inventing the SAFE. And like I definitely felt that, which was like, we're not a YC company, but it was so standard that we just used it, and it was like everyone kind of accepts that that's what you're going to use.
Sorry, you mentioned the side letter. Could you explain what that is?
So we had like a side letter with just like additional like information rights that we signed. And so it was nothing crazy, but just like basic information rights for Harlem.
Before we get to advice and some reflections on what you have learned and what you might do differently next time, I'm curious about what happened after you closed the round in terms of your communication with Harlem, how you started to build that relationship, and just like kind of the cadence that you fell into when it comes to your investor reporting.
Yeah, so I mean, our cadence now is we meet every month, and then I'll Slack them in between with anything that I need their help with. And so that's like what we fell into. I know something that you wanted to touch on is talking about learning to communicate with investors. And I would say like the number one thing that I learned, it took me like at least a few months, is to not focus on what's going right in calls with them. And what I mean by that is like, it's okay to highlight like this thing was good, but you actually don't get that much substance out of it. And so in some ways it's a trust exercise, right? But you have to get to a place of trust where you can actually talk a lot about the things that are going wrong, and you don't feel like, oh, I talked about the things that are going wrong and now they're going to think I'm an idiot and never want to help me, and like, they're going to want my company to fail. Like, that's not how they're going to react, right? They're going to react more positively than that and like try to help and understand that like things go wrong and whatever else. Like they're not there to like lecture you. They're there to kind of be part of the team. But it takes trust on the founder side to get to a place where you can do that. And once you can do that, you have a much more, I think, fruitful set of conversations with them. It becomes less superficial and much more like substantive around how to get things right and move the company forward.
Is there a standard sort of email that you send to Harlem and Yohei on a monthly basis with laying out some of the key metrics or key updates from around the business that you can send async so that when you connect with them live, you can have those discussions about the
I actually have a deck template that I use. And so I built out like a very brief deck template that like is the structure I now use, and that just talks through like what's going on, like highlights, early on when we were pre-revenue, it was just like customer highlights, engagement highlights. Now it's obviously it's more customer and revenue based. But yeah, I built that out, and that's what I send every month.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, I think so. We've gone kind of start to finish through the nitty gritty details of the round. Now that you're on the other side of it, and you are probably thinking about gearing up for your next round of funding. Well, to start, was there a piece of advice that you received from someone, maybe another founder, maybe from a VC, as you were raising the pre-seed round, that has really stuck with you and that you'd give to a founder who might be going through the journey for the first time?
The best piece of advice I actually received was somebody telling me like, usually you go through a few calls and you have a sense of like what the issues are that are most concerning to investors, rather than like let them be and like hope that people don't ask about those things. You should come up with the right framework to position those things positively and then lead with those things. And in doing that, you actually are able to meaningfully kind of strengthen your pitch, and not have to worry so much about those core concerns. And so that was, like, I would think the best. It's sounds simple. It's a little bit harder to do in practice, but it's worth spending the time on figuring out what that narrative should be, and then going into it that way, right? And so, like, in an example when where somebody's like really concerned about how ChatGPT can do what you do, come up with the framework around how you're building a more holistic platform with integrations to other places that pulls in the right relevant data, like whatever else, and that is obviously not something that can just be done from a chatbot.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think it ties to a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier, where you're layering on all of these things that you need your partner investor to believe about the world, and you're just stating those up front as part of your pitch. And if you say it and they disagree with that, with that, like, with that piece, then at least it gets you to like the place where you're ultimately going. It gets you there faster, right? As opposed to waiting for them to ask for it.
Yeah. Plus, then you're kind of playing defensive, right? You're just trying to steer the conversation away from these topics, which is obviously not a good place to be in.
I think that's probably an answer to what you would do differently in your next round, is maybe just
yeah. Well, I actually have two. So that's one. And then the other thing I would do differently is I would definitely structure the round a little bit more. And so what I did last time was just like talk to people as they were willing to talk to me. I think that the better way to run the process, and what I would do in the future, is like run it as like a 4-week sprint. And so tell everybody beforehand, like, we're doing this over the course of 4 weeks. If this timeline doesn't work for you, I'm sorry, like, just not a fit. Week 1 is going to be intro calls. Like, week 2 will be intro calls. Week 3, I'll open up the data room. Week 4, whatever, I'll do like ICs and get to a term sheet, something like that, right? It doesn't have to be exactly that pattern, but figure out what the right structure is, and then kind of force people into that structure, and kind of working at that pace, because it does help create the urgency, and helps create like the FOMO effect for investors without having to do a whole lot, right? You just know that you're following this process. They know everybody else is following that process. If they're interested, other people are probably interested, right? So they just know that there's other suitors.
Yeah, that's another way to flip the script too, from being more defensive to going on offense, is to create that time constraint. Awesome. Well, I know we've got a couple of folks in the audience here. Does anyone have any questions for Taher? If so, we can address those with the last couple of minutes that we've got here. When you ultimately go out to raise your Series A, do you think you're going to use DocDraft's to put together the legal docs?
Yeah, totally. We can use DocDraft.
All right. I'm not sure if anybody's feeling talkative today. But thank you so much for having this conversation, Taher. I thought it was super interesting. I really appreciated some of the points that you made around like how you should think about putting together a narrative for an early stage round, and picking an investor who has humility and who is going to provide you support in some ways that are a little bit outside of the generalities that a lot of VCs talk about. Any other last little tidbits that you like to offer up, or are there any resources that you found helpful around the fundraising process that you'd encourage our team to take a look at?
Yeah, one thing that I found really helpful, Crunchbase has this, and then there's a free resource called it's called Signal. It's run by NFX, which is a fund, and it has a ton of data on investors. But secondly, like actually one of the things that I find really helpful in there is it has like the range of checks they write, and so it gives you a good framing going into any conversation, like if this is actually like likely to be the right fit, and if not, that's also okay. Like you can go into conversation knowing like, hey, they typically write later stage checks, this is more like a get to know you and like keep in touch type of call. But yeah, it just gives good frame of reference going into calls, and so I've always found that helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And actually, sorry, you just brought up a point that I would love to ask you about with a couple of minutes here. One of the things that has come out in a couple of conversations that I've had is how you want to begin building relationships with your next round of investors well in advance of the time when you're actually getting ready to kick off your fundraise process. Is there anything that you're doing currently to start to plant the seeds for having those conversations once DocDraft gets to that point?
Honestly, probably not enough. The good thing about being in like a big tech market is like there's always like events going on where you can go and meet people and like just like kind of circulate the idea. But yeah, I think it is like it's good to have the right point of contact at our firm, even if you're not raising, just because then you know like this is the person I want to reach out to when the time comes around.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, this has been a really awesome conversation, and really looking forward to following along with DocDraft's journey, as well as having you along for the ride with Air CFOs. So we will ship this off to our video production partners, and I will share with you the produced video once it is ready for review.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Alex. Always great to chat.
Thank you, Taher, and thank you to everyone who joined in for the live stream. Have a good rest of your Thursday, everybody.
Yep. Take care.